Welcome to the second episode of the Bully PulPitt. I'm your host, Matt Stalford, and this month's episode is all about energy. From the electricity that turns on your lights to the gas that fuels your car, the availability of energy resources is crucial to the success of our country and our planet. The United States has had an interesting relationship with energy, being one of the first countries to effectively harvest both oil and natural gas, while also being a leading pioneer in both wind and solar technology. It's this unique and special relationship that makes American energy production so interesting and why we picked it as the topic for this episode. But before we can understand American energy today, we have to understand American energy of the past, which brings us to the 1960s. OPEC, or the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, was founded in 1960 by a group of countries originally Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. These countries produced a large share of the world's oil, and by organizing together, they hoped to dominate the global oil market. And today, OPEC still exists. It currently has 13 member nations and accounts for about 42% of all global oil production. Now that might seem like a lot now, but by the late 1960s, they had much more power than they do today. In fact, at the time, the United States and other countries all considered OPEC's oil dominance to be an actual threat to their foreign policy aims. Now, this was a very intelligent assessment from the US because in 1973, several key players in OPEC were angry that the United States was supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War, which was being fought between Israel and a coalition of Arab states over strategic areas of land. The countries involved in OPEC, along with Egypt and Syria, cut oil production and started an oil embargo against Israel's allies, including the United States. And the effects were huge. A recession struck both the US and Europe as gas prices soared. Before the recession, the average price of a gallon of gasoline in the US was 38.5 cents a gallon. That's $2.11 in 2017. By June of 1974, it had risen to 55 cents, or $3.01 a gallon in 2017 dollars. Because of this, OPEC quickly realized that they could use their control of the oil supply as a political and economic weapon. Now at the same time, the US government decided that it had to make moves to become more independent of these foreign oil suppliers, and they took a few crucial steps to do this. For starters, we started harvesting more oil at home, passing various tax incentives to domestic oil companies with the goal of increasing production. Next, we invested in the construction of transnational pipelines, which transport oil from places like Canada or Alaska to the rest of the US, something still controversial to this day. But what's not controversial is that these pipelines led to an increase in domestic oil production and a higher level of oil independence than ever before. In fact, the United States eventually became the top oil producer in the world. For brief periods throughout the 70s and the 80s, we were number one in oil production, a title we haven't been able to claim since 1990. But despite this emphasis on lessening our reliance on foreign oil, oil was never the only source of American energy. Now, while oil takes up a much smaller portion of America's energy supply than it used to, this brings us to our quick overview of the United States' recent changes in the energy industry. First, we'll take a look at how the coal industry compares to the oil industry. Then, we'll talk about renewable energy before diving into a more detailed look at fracking. Coal used to be a booming industry in America, but it's declined over the past decade and a half, with over 400 coal mines shutting down before 2009 alone. At the same time, domestic oil jobs have soared, with Goldman Sachs predicting that we'll add up to 100,000 jobs in that sector by the end of 2018. Now, both of these industries face uncertain futures in the long term, but in the short term, oil is doing just fine, despite the steady rise of renewable energy. Now today, renewable energy continues to show promising growth, especially in terms of jobs. Behind the oil industry, the solar industry is now the second largest domestic energy employer. And all three of these industries have lessened our dependence on foreign energy imports over the past 50 years. However, no industry has done more work over the past 10 years on that front than fracking, a highly controversial yet highly lucrative industry that took off over the past decade. Fracking, short for hydraulic fracturing, is a relatively new form of energy production in the US. Natural gas, stored deep in underground shales, was once too difficult and expensive to reach, but that changed with the introduction of fracking. The process to getting this natural gas involves drilling straight down into the shale layer and then drilling horizontally. High-pressure fluids made of water and other chemicals are pumped down to crack the shale, allowing the oil and natural gas to flow back up the well. After, some of the water used in the process is recycled, but most is pumped back into disposal wells. The U.S. is the home to the 4 largest oil shales in the world, including the Marcellus Shale located right here in Pennsylvania. Now, there are a variety of issues surrounding fracking. The horizontal drilling has created many legal issues for those who live within close proximity of wells. Property rights entitle private owners to manipulate the land however they see fit, but it does not include the right to explore or extract the minerals beneath the surface. So, while a community may live several miles away from a well, the well could still be drilled horizontally under their homes. Landowners who are paid off for the land to build the wells are compensated in the millions, yet residents just down the road are sitting on top of the same resources and not receiving any of the economic benefits. Additionally, environmental advocates have raised concerns over the safety of fracking, particularly over the disposal of wastewater caused by the fracking. For one, disposing wastewater deep underground is a potential cause of induced earthquakes. Induced earthquakes are tremors that occur in areas without a history of seismic activity, such as Oklahoma. However, the United States Geological Survey is unsure whether fracking is the cause of these earthquakes or any other geological activity. Further, storing wastewater underground has also harmed stored water supplies. Mismanagement of fracking fluids have been known to contaminate deep underground water supplies, which have been protected for millions of years. In one case, over 100 cattle were killed by drinking contaminated water, and there are serious concerns that human health can be harmed as well. With elevated methane and lead levels often found in areas where fracking is common, an EPA study in 2015 confirmed these fears and concluded that water supplies are highly vulnerable in areas where fracking occurs. Despite these concerns, fracking has been economically beneficial for many areas. For one, our dependency on foreign oil has dropped since fracking has become commonplace. In 2005, the United States imported 69% of our oil, while today, we only import 25%. While this is likely due to a variety of factors, fracking has undeniably contributed in increasing our energy independence. Furthermore, investments by oil companies into areas which sit over shales have stimulated many economies throughout the country. Oftentimes, farmers have been able to cash in on their large land holdings by selling gas rights to frackers for huge amounts of money. However, this can often make it difficult to continue farming, as livestock who live on fracked land may not be healthy enough for consumption. Also, in many cases, the immediate economic burst brought on by fracking can frizzle over time as the oil companies decide it's time to pack up and leave, especially if the local communities have to fund water cleanup efforts without any assistance. Now that we've talked about fracking in depth, we're going to discuss the future and where our country is headed moving forward. America's pivot towards green energy really began in 2009 under the Obama administration, partly as a response to the Great Recession. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, more commonly known as the stimulus package, kicked off his presidency with $6 billion set aside for clean energy projects. Among that $6 billion, $535 million was saved for the solar energy company, Solyndra, which would later gain fame for failing spectacularly. What Solyndra did was show the Obama administration that intervention on behalf of renewable companies was not going to be as easy as they initially thought. In fact, they paid quite the price for it, with presidential candidate Mitt Romney slamming President Obama for the government's investment in Solyndra, despite the vast majority of the other renewable companies who received the stimulus funding ultimately being successful. Later in his term, President Obama would enact what's called the Clean Power Plan, or CPP for short, which, according to the EPA, was designed to reduce carbon pollution from power plants, the nation's largest source, while maintaining energy reliability and affordability. So, did this plan work? Well, like all things in politics, it's complicated. Opponents claim the CPP only served to raise the price of coal power without any tangible benefit to make up for it. The EPA and the Obama administration both said that reducing the use of coal power is a benefit by itself because of the harmful effects coal has on our environment. Both of these arguments were mostly rendered moot in 2016 when, in response to a legal challenge against the CPP, the Supreme Court ruled that enforcement of the plan must be put on hold until the lower court deliberating on it issued a ruling. Of course, Trump pledged to end this plan once he entered office, and so for now, a successfully implemented clean power plan exists only in Al Gore's dreams. But that brings us to the next part of moving forward, Trump's presidency. So one of Trump's biggest energy-related promises during the campaign was that he wanted to make America energy independent, regardless of whether that independence was coming from renewable or non-renewable resources. Every single one of Trump's major policies are all aimed at accomplishing this goal. He started with approving construction of the controversial Dakota Access Pipeline, claiming it would create jobs in energy and construction, and by installing Scott Pruitt as head of the EPA. If you remember from our last episode, Pruitt does not believe in man-made climate change, and his policies so far as EPA chief certainly reflect that. Pruitt is operating the EPA through a lens proposed by Trump during a 2016 speech, saying, "Any future regulation will go through a simple test. Is this regulation good for the American worker? If it doesn't pass this test, the rule will not be approved." Now, this does not look good for things like the Clean Power Plan mentioned earlier, as their biggest criticism of it is that it's harmful for jobs. Further, and in keeping with his promises of independence, Trump has shown interest in withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, the Paris Climate Agreement is a UN proposal negotiated by 195 different countries with the goal of combating climate change and lowering carbon emissions. Trump and his supporters believe that signing deals like this sacrifice America's ability to decide its own energy policy, and so it looks likely that we won't be in this agreement for much longer. So, where are we headed in the future? Well, it's not entirely clear, which reveals one of the few truths about American politics in this episode. Nothing is permanent. Though Obama made waves with his strong renewable energy investment during his tenure, Trump can very easily overturn most of his initiatives through simple executive orders. This is a theme throughout American history. Whether it's about civil rights, education policy, or even energy, it's impossible to say with real confidence just what path we're traveling down. We'll just have to wait and see. So thank you for watching this episode of our show. If you enjoyed, like our Facebook page as well as the one for UPTV so you can get the latest updates on the Bully Pulpit and check out all of our content. As always, this has been the Bully Pulpit. We hope to see you next time. Thanks.